Hello, please let me see your ticket stubs for the double-edged double bill. This week, Forest Whitaker is the last king of Repo Men. Each week, Adam Thomas and Thomas Mariani will come to the table to discuss the randomly selected yin and yang of a double feature. Then, both will have to pick a number between 1 and 10 in order to seal their fates for the next episode. One will have 2 good movies, the other 2 bad ones. Let the chaos begin. I am Thomas Mariani, the clear king here of Scotland, obviously, me, Thomas Mariani. And I should say that Adam isn't here this week. We've had a lot of scheduling conflicts with this particular episode, so he wasn't able to join us for this one. But in his stead, we have one of our returning favorites, a buddy of mine for many years now, Torrey Depina. Torrey, welcome to the show.
Hey, happy to be back.
Yeah, honestly, I'm surprised you're here considering you just had your organs taken out of you because you were late on those payments. But you're still soldiering on, this guy being just covered in blood and gore.
Thank God for the black market.
Yes, for sure. But we are here today to discuss Mr. Forest Whitaker, which was, shout out to our patrons, patreon.com/DEDBpod. More on them later. Because this kind of tied into the movie Big George Foreman, which would have recently opened. That does not feel like a real movie every time I see a trailer. It's playing now. And I'm still just like, is this like a fake movie? If I were to get a ticket for it, it would just be like a fooled you would show up for 2 hours.
Yeah, I'm still in disbelief. Every time I see that trailer, it just, I don't know if it's like a Mad TV sketch or whatnot, but no, it's something serious, and it's got Forest Whitaker in it. Hey.
Yes, it does have Forest Whitaker, who is very interesting because I feel like Forest Whitaker is one of those guys where he has the career very much of like a character actor. He kind of has that like the sort of workman ability where like he'll do a lot of different projects, especially as of late, how many like weird like action movies that he'll just pop up in, like in Taken 3 and shit like that. But at the same time, he has the gravitas and that kind of like respectability to where everyone still knows his name. He still is like well-known and respected as just an amazing actor in his own right.
Yeah, absolutely. I always go back to kind of how he kind of terrified me as a kid in movies like Jason's Lyric, which he's like, you know, his character he plays is kind of like the catalyst for the trauma, if you will, of that movie. But yeah, no, he's a guy who's managed to transcend that label of quote unquote character acting or character actor, and has, you know, quite a respectable career. I mean, more than respectable career. He's got a Best Actor Oscar on a shelf somewhere.
Yeah, especially like I watched one of those, you know, actor goes through all their iconic roles videos that was on there for Forest Whitaker, and it's so fascinating how like despite how like very big and verbose he can be as an actor, he's a very quiet, soft-spoken guy, and he's just very much into the craft of it all. And you can see that all the way back from like when he made his debut and stuff like Fast Times at Ridgemont High, and then moving forward, even like as young as he was there, it feels like he's had that sort of consistent jovial spirit to him, but at the same time, when he needs to be like, you know, full of remorse and regret, it really feels palpable.
You see it with the 2 movies we've seen tonight.
Yeah, which we should get into. So at the end of our previous regular episode, we ended up picking, you know, our good pick and our bad pick, as we usually do. And we ended up with my good pick of The Last King of Scotland and Adam's bad pick of Repo Men. So we'll go ahead and get into that now first with The Last King of Scotland.
How many doctors are there here?
Well, there's me, and now there's you.
Good morning, Dr. Garrigan.
The president wants to see you.
You are British.
Well, I'm Scottish.
Scottish? Why didn't you say so?
This is the sort of man a president needs around him.
You want me to be your physician?
What do you need is to have some fun. You are very naughty.
Me?
Dr. Garrigan, it's 4 a.m.
They've taken my passport. I have to go home now.
You cannot. You are like my own son, and you have grossly offended
So The Last King of Scotland came out September 27th, 2006, from director Kevin MacDonald, and is based on the novel by Giles Foden, which we should note, despite the fact that this is a technical true story in terms of, obviously, this is the movie where Forest Whitaker portrayed Idi Amin and got his Best Actor Oscar that you mentioned earlier, Torrey. It is still very much, loose in terms of, certain elements of it, particularly the person who no one really talks about with this movie, who, despite him being technically the lead character of James McAvoy, is kind of based on a couple of real people, different doctors and stuff who were around Idi Amin and his circle, but is not really a real specific person, which I'll just say, as someone who I picked this but I had not seen it before, only just on the basis of, obviously, Forest Whitaker won his Oscar for this movie, and I was very curious to finally see it. And I think it's a real testament to Whittaker, whose performance is amazing, and I get why he won. Especially because I think he is single-handedly turns this movie over the edge from, kind of being bad Oscar bait. Because aside from him, there's a lot of fucking dumb, stupid shit in this movie I really don't like.
Same, because I actually hadn't seen the film until this week. I know my parents had watched it when it was available for rental. So this might have been late 06, maybe early to mid 2007. And I remember walking through and seeing the scene with the hooks, but that was pretty much it. And obviously, the fact that he won his Oscar that year as well, which I think he beat DiCaprio for Blood Diamond, amongst others. I'm with you as far as the film itself. I feel he and McAvoy. I would argue that the actors in general are what carry this movie, because everything else is kind of just there, especially from a narrative structure. There's nothing really much there except you're kind of just following one man's descent into, as a result of his extremely rash and bad decision making, and striking up a fiendship, if you will, with Idi Amin.
Yeah, by the way, other nominees that Whittaker beat were Leonardo DiCaprio for Blood Diamond, as you mentioned, but also Ryan Gosling for Half Nelson,
yes,
Peter O'Toole for Venus, and Will Smith for The Pursuit of Happiness. The first time he got a nom. Well, no, not the first time, because there was Ali was the first.
Oh, that's
time.
Right. He did get nominated for Ali. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Yes, but this was during that time where he's like, oh man, I really want to win an Oscar, and he did, in a very interesting way.
Absolutely.
Yes, but yeah, I think, to go back to at least the movie itself, I agree with you that all of the actors are pretty committed, where aside from Whittaker, who we'll expound upon a bit later, McAvoy, this is pretty early in his career. This is just after he played Mr. Tumnus in Chronicles of Narnia, but it was before even Wanted or any of the X-Men movies or Split, any of that stuff. And I think he's a very talented actor. I just think that he's definitely saddled with just the biggest problem of this movie, which is just the fact that we mainly, like I mentioned earlier, we start off with James McAvoy, who plays the Scottish character here, Dr. Nicholas Garrigan, as he randomly decides, I'm tired of being in Scotland in the suburbs, I want to go somewhere else, and he randomly selects Uganda, which just leads him to go over to Uganda at this point in the 70s. And he initially is with Gillian Anderson, who her and her husband are part of a sort of medical tent for the citizens of Uganda. But then he ends up having a chance meeting with Idi Amin, and it ends up kind of being roped into his circle. And I'll just say, especially that first, 20 minutes with the almost will they won't they affair thing with Gillian Anderson, I was really just what, this is what this movie is about? Really? I don't give a shit. Go back to Forest Whitaker, and we eventually do. But centering the whole thing on him, it's that classic, Oscar baity thing. Oh, we can't focus this story on, say, an actual, Ugandan character, or even, a foreigner who's a black guy. We have to have the key focus of this white dude who is not really interesting at all as a character.
I mean, from what I gathered from the beginning of this movie, I'm angry at my dad because he doesn't completely accept my degree or whatever my line of work, even though we're basically in the same line of work. He wants to fuck everything. I mean, there's that too. To be very blunt. I mean, literally opens with that. And then to the thing with Gillian Anderson, which went fucking nowhere, to say the least.
Hey, she showed up on a bus later, and he was like, hey, remember me, Gillian Anderson? And she's like, oh, fuck you, get away from me, and that's it.
I know I shouldn't have, I don't know if, it was it was like the proper response was for me to laugh at that scene, but I'm just kind of laughing my ass off, kind of like, you stupid fucking. I it's hard for me to really feel for this character at all in this movie, and the fact that they decide to, and it's not even James McAvoy's fault. His performance is really fucking good. It was definitely not on par with Whittaker's, but obviously the close second compared to and I would say Kerry Washington third. It's just like I'm watching this the entire time, and I'm thinking to myself, man, it's like I'm kind of with the racist British guy, and I don't want to be with the racist British guy for obvious reasons, but he's not wrong when he kind of throws it right back in James McAvoy's face when they have their little conversation where he's like, oh, now I need to go and get out of here. I was like, yeah, I mean, you were kind of living like, enjoying this power you were getting with being, Idi Amin's pretty much doctor, confidant, whatever you want to call it. And now, it started to bite you in the ass a little bit. And now all of a sudden it's like, oh no, now I need to leave. Now I need to go. And it's just like, I wish they gave us a character, one that we could give a shit about, like, to follow in this story.
Honestly, like, this whole movie, like, especially when he ended up showing up later, like, working with McAvoy, I was like, oh, wait, David Oyelowo. Why didn't we just follow, like, David Oyelowo's character instead of fucking McAvoy?
Yeah, and he ends up being, unfortunately, I hate this shit. This is exactly why I didn't even like movies that came around this time that were, Africa, like making these films in Africa, like Blood Diamond. I have issues with Blood Diamond, and I ended up having similar issues with this movie. It's just so Hollywood. You know what I mean? I know that sounds really half-assed to like have that be a criticism, but it's just like they didn't really feel like the film itself had any soul except when Forest Whitaker is on the screen. Like, he is the soul of this movie. He's the heart and soul of this movie. You feel it when he's being charming. You feel it when he's being psychotic. You feel it when he's being paranoid, every which way. Like, he carries this film pretty much on his back the entirety for the 2 hours you're watching this.
It's this weird thing where the director, Kevin MacDonald, is a guy who, he came from documentaries originally. This is his first narrative feature. And I think, like, his shooting style, which feels very similar to, like, a lot of the sort of shooting style for, like, serious, dramatic movies around this time, which is to say, it kind of looks like that you wouldn't steal a VHS PSA. It's like, you wouldn't steal a DVD. The kind of thing with, like, the weird, like, contrast and the, like, different, like, the grain and stuff that's put all over for, like, the digital photography. It feels like it's trying to be a bit more, like, oh, we're having this sort of grounded documentary aesthetic, but then the screenplay constantly betrays that with a lot of the different twists and turns, particularly my big thing. The point where I was really just like, oh, God, I don't know if I'm going to like this fucking movie. When James McAvoy and Kerry Washington fuck, I was, like, deeply upset. Just like, no, what? Wait, what? This doesn't make any fucking sense. Why is this happening?
Yeah, so it should be like a thing where it's like, you should probably start to get out of here, but it's like, why did we need... Why was the sex scene necessary? Like, what was the whole point? Was it just give him a love interest? Because I mean, he didn't really like earn any of like those moments. It was kind of just like Kerry Washington gets treated just like the actress in the beginning of the movie, and what almost happened to Gillian Anderson. It felt like more of like an object or a prop or something like that, or a plot device, as opposed to like her own character.
I don't know. I mean, Kerry Washington saw, James McAvoy help out her kid who was having a seizure, and she's instantly just like, I want to fuck. And it's like, really?
That's it. It's exactly like I was even doing stuff where I was trying to look in like stuff about her character historically. The only thing I could really find was something from her son, who's kind of a nut job himself. If you ever like look deep into his Facebook page, that I was able to find out of it. But like, he said that like the portrayal wasn't really accurate to what she was as a person or whatsoever. I mean, she was heavily religious. She was really involved in trying to bring progress to Uganda as like as far as like updating with trying to get better healthcare, trying to have like, better connections with people like religiously. She was very spiritual. None of those things that you get from Kerry Washington's portrayal in this movie, or how they wrote Kerry Washington's portrayal in this movie. It's obviously not her fault. She's just doing her job.
Yeah. Especially also when you find out like the story of like Kay Amin and how she actually died was like, she was pregnant from an affair. And then it was a Ugandan physician who she had sex with. And then he ended up trying to give her an abortion that ended up being botched, and she died that way. and then he committed suicide, which is a bit more of like a tragic, upsetting story that had to happen. Though the element that is true is admittingly an effective, upsetting moment when James McAvoy discovers her body and how it's been returned and stitched together. That is deeply unsettling in a way that I think is authentic, and I think also works in like that sort of, the style actually benefits that particular moment.
I didn't expect it to be that graphic, honestly, but I do actually, to go back to like when my parents were watching it, I do remember my dad having quite a visceral reaction to the film. And he reacted highly at that scene. He was just like, oh no, I can't do this, like kind of reaction. And when I finally see it, obviously it's like, oh, I understand now. I get where he was coming from, but it's a very man, especially considering the history of like K-I-mean in real life, it really just chilled me. Like it really like threw me off when I saw that. I was like, I did not expect that. I was like, oh my goodness.
Yeah, for sure. It's very upsetting. And a lot of that, I think, obviously comes from, we should talk further, Whittaker in this movie. Despite like all these issues that we clearly have with what is around him in this movie, it is such an enigmatic performance from like the moment he does that speech when we first see him. Instantaneously, you're like, oh, I get why this guy is like sort of like a populist leader. To where it's just like, yep, that guy, like, he's the classic, like, oh, I want to hang out with that political leader. That means I'm immediately like behind him and love everything about him. And then as we learn more and more about like his own paranoias and his history and everything, it's just like, oh god, this guy is like a human being in the way that you're initially attracted to. And then as you find out more, just like, oh, you're a deeply fucked up, upsetting person who went through a lot of shit and now is taking down everybody who you find to have any kind of paranoia about. It's a genuinely amazing performance that 100% I get why he won the Oscar for it.
Oh, absolutely. Like I said before, him being charming, him being paranoid, him being downright a bastard, like an evil son of a bitch, a despot. You know what I mean? Every single scene that he is in, he does not, nothing is wasted with him. Stuff is wasted with the majority of the cast in regards to this film, as far as like their characters. We mentioned the doctor from before. I just dropped his name. You had just said his name earlier.
David Oyelowo, you mean?
Yeah. Yes. Yes. Exactly. Absolutely. Like even him. What a waste. And I just didn't like how the whole sacrifice thing for him to let James McAvoy leave. That never sat right with me. Like as a film, like as a narrative, like as I'm watching this, you know what I mean? I remember seeing that clip like months ago, because it just happened to be playing at my job's break room. It was playing uncut, if you could believe that. But
what a fun break room! Just like, oh man, exhausting time. Let me turn on the tube.
Yeah, we need to watch The Last King of Scotland on Stars. Yeah. But and it was just like, I was just like, wait, really? That's how he gets? And it's just like I hate the. I hate like the white savior shit that like they do with DiCaprio and Blood Diamond. And I felt like it was like a reverse that when it came to this. And it's just shit like that just took me out of it.
Well, especially when it's upsetting because like there's a bit of commentary they kind of slide in very last minute during like that scene and the last scene between McAvoy and Whittaker, where they do talk about just like, oh, you thought you, a white guy, could like come around and play with like the natives in Uganda, and you didn't think that like this was gonna like end up with some shit happening. And then even Oyelowo even speaks about like, oh, they'll believe you because you're white. And it's like, oh, okay, you're starting to kind of actually address the major problem of this movie 2 hours in, and we're done, and it's over. So it's like, oh, great.
We addressed the elephant in the room, but hey, listen, it might have taken us 2 hours to get to this point, but you had a lot of fun along the way, right? And I was just like, no, okay.
It's about the friends we made along the way.
It's about the fiends. Yeah, exactly. The fiends we made along the way. Oh man, is it bad that when I saw that Kerry Washington scene, I just immediately thought of that Simpsons clip where it's Dr. Nick going, oh, Mr. McGregor, what a leg for an arm and an arm for a leg. I was just like, dude, because it was so out of that movie by that point. I wasn't with it at that point, because it was just so much filler and following McAvoy around, where it's just basically like, I feel like the film's telling me, oh, you should sympathize with him, right? He clearly went over his head. I was like, yeah, but this isn't a child. Okay, this is an adult. This is a guy who took the Hippocratic Oath. This is a man who went through the medical field. He knows what right and wrong is. You know what I mean? Like, he did this all for like the adventure. He wanted the feeling of adventure or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, at that point, with as bad of a decision making as he made, I mean, he might as well have just went to Canada instead of Uganda.
Especially when like he's supposed to be like our audience surrogate. I don't know, for like a laundry list of reasons, he is not my surrogate. Fuck that guy. I don't want him to like represent me going to Uganda. And just like, oh, I'm here for like the adventure. And it's like, okay, man, sure.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, you know, the amount of times that he gets laid in this movie that he does not even have to put in work for. This is like literally like the easiest, whitest journey you could think of for such a character. And it's like, this is your avatar. He's like, the fuck he is? No, he's not. Absolutely not.
I'm not with him.
I am not.
He does not represent me.
Oh my goodness! Oh boy!
But to get back to the Whittaker of it all, I'm curious. Like, what would you say is sort of like your favorite sort of standout moment for Whittaker in this movie?
I wish I could just say yes, honestly, because from the opening speech to, you know, him waiting for, you know, when McAvoy first meets him and he has like his you know, his little busted paw or whatever. You know, even down to the scenes that like I thought I was gonna roll my eyes at, like, you know, the flatulent scene, you know, to put it lightly. But I would honestly say the one that really showed the best range, which is kind of a weird scene, is when he's staring at him after they lift up McAvoy with the torture hooks on his chest and shit. And like he's staring there, and then like when he starts to look down, and like, you can see like the slight tear in his eye as he starts to kind of turn away. And you don't know, it's like, wait, does he feel bad because he really felt a connection with this guy and now he's watching him get tortured and it wasn't as satisfying as it was, you know, seeing his enemies get killed or some shit. And it's just like a weird moment where this monster is like starting to show some sort of sorrow, but it's also like you're Idi Amin. So but it's like the fact that I'm being made to feel this way in the moment watching this scene is like a testament to how good Forest Whitaker is in this movie, how great Forest Whitaker is in this movie. It's definitely one of the greatest performances ever captured on screen. Just, you know, wish the movie could match that.
Well, especially when I liked how Giles Foden talked about in terms of like how he portrayed Amin in his book as sort of like a comparison to like Macbeth. And I think in regards to like Whittaker's character, it does kind of feel like when, like, if you actually read any Shakespeare play based on a real life figure and compare it to the real life figure, there's a lot of varying different things that like conflict with history. But at the same time, you get a full sense of at least like this sort of character and how you can see how this person would exist. This sort of larger than life figure where like prior to this, honestly, like my own ignorance, I only knew like sort of vague things like that Idi Amin like allegedly was a cannibal and all that other stuff. Sort of like what I had seen in basically like sort of pop culture and like historical like vagaries that I'd learned through, you know, the public school system in America. What I like about the way that like Whittaker portrays him is there's so much of like that great thing when like an actor or a storyteller and like anything is focusing on a villain and they totally get the villain's perspective in like a complete way where he thinks that he's right. And I think that's why like my favorite scene is the bit after he forces like all of the Asian communities out of Uganda, and then he's talking to James McAvoy about like, why didn't you convince me harder to not do that? Because he sees the repercussions, and it's not a case of like, oh, I did something wrong and I should learn from this. It's no, I have these trusted advisors around me who I felt I could trust, and they didn't advise me correctly. That really just summarizes beautifully what he's doing in this movie. We're just like, oh, he has his logic that he thinks like this is how it should go. And it's like, no, dude, everything's just like falling the fuck apart around you, and it's your fault, but you have to find someone else to blame. But it feels so human and so like layered in that way, where I'm just like, this is such, that's why I think he's such a fascinating sort of portrayal of like a villainous character, and why I think Whittaker is like really the only person that could have like portrayed all of that.
Oh, absolutely. You know, I mean, like that scene you spoke about, it's like, oh, you should have you know, persuaded me better. I was like, I feel like this is like I feel like I'm at my job right now and a supervisor's trying to pin the blame onto me, especially when that supervisor like an hour ago was like 100% confident and 100% sure that I had made the right decision by kicking out all the Asians out of my country with there should be, this is a perfect plan.
I don't know, Tori, that was a boneheaded move of you. How dare you do that?
Oh yeah, exactly. It's like you should have what's the thing where it's like, damn it. Like you just said, actually, it's he brings all that to life in a way that I feel like only Forest Whitaker could. Nobody else could have brought in that could have brought in that life out of that character the way he did.
Yeah, I think it just really shows the variety and the range of him as an actor, where you get like the cuddlier scenes that you mentioned, like the sort of like two bros hanging out scenes, where you're kind of fooled into like, oh, you know, him and McAvoy, they're just dudes being dudes. But you, at the same time, it's like you mentioned, you kind of feel that sympathy for him. I think it's because Whittaker's face is so beautifully like kind in a weird way, and like you're immediately invited, just like, oh, this guy wouldn't hurt me, he's like a big teddy bear, he wouldn't do anything to me. But then that teddy bear has like a knife in its paw and it fucking starts stabbing people, and it's like, oh no, what? No, not Teddy Whittaker, why would you ever do this? I can't believe it. Like that sort of betrayal, you feel that betrayal along with McAvoy, and then the way that the audience surrogate thing, that's the only time it works, where you feel that same betrayal with him in a way that's like very authentic.
Absolutely. I mean, teddy bear. I don't know. I've seen. I mentioned earlier about the movie Jason's Lyric, and I was like, no, I've seen him portray Mad Dog. Okay, that's why the entire time when I'm watching these scenes where he's being like jovial and happy, and it's like it's just two bros hanging out. It's like, no, it is not two bros hanging out. I have seen this play out before. I have that immediate feeling in my gut that something terrible, dark, and horrifying is around the corner. I will not enjoy these. That's the thing with this film. It just made me like on edge the entire time. Like, I don't trust shit that's going on right now. I don't care how good you are, Forest Whitaker. I know what's around that corner, and it is it's awful to say the least.
And I guess, was there anything else besides sort of like Whittaker and like the actors that you liked about the movie? Would you say that this was at all like a decent, good pick because of those elements, or is there anything else that kind of like at least like caught your eye and didn't like lull you into a sense of like what the fuck's happening?
I mean, it's shot beautifully. I mean, to say the least. I mean, there was like as far as like that kind of that yellowish like hue, I mean, or whatever. I kind of felt like I was watching a Tony Scott film without the quick cuts or the obnoxiously, you know, fucking put in your face quick cuts, because it looks beautiful. Like the way it was shot was beautiful, and almost kind of like because you mentioned this guy was a documentarian. I haven't seen any other films by this guy whatsoever. I knew he made State of Play. I never saw State of Play. Those kind of like foreign policy, Middle Eastern type movies about America's involvement in shit kind of wore me out by the time Rendition came out, and I was like 16. So it's like, nah, I'm good. But when it comes down to like how it's shot, I mean, it looks beautiful. I mean, it kind of has like that yellowishness you saw in movies like Traffic. As far as like from a technical standpoint, that's kind of like really what I like could say is like, you know, great cinematography. Because I really don't think the script was there. I really don't think the storytelling was there. I think it was just this is an actor's movie. This is like, you know, unfortunately, you know, it's got like a bad connotation to it, but it's Oscar bait. It just happens to be high quality Oscar bait because of the caliber of actor involved.
Yeah, I would say there's a couple of moments where I think, particularly whenever you see like Idi Amin amongst like the regular folks in Uganda, I felt that kind of like, oh, this is where the authentic documentarian stuff works. Like there's a bit where there's a bunch of kids who are like playing ball outside, and Idi Amin just like goes up to him and they start like punching his hands that he has up and stuff like that. Those are the moments where I kind of felt like, oh, this feels like I'm just sort of like in the middle of this particular place and time, and it feels like pretty authentic. And even like when you have certain like moments where it gets like grisly, like particularly the scene where like he has all those guys like captured and lined up and they're like horribly murdered, I think is one of the better examples where that kind of Tony Scott-ism for it, I think, works. Because I think a lot of this, I agree with you, has the flares of like a Tony Scott, but not as much of like the actual stylistic integrity of a Tony Scott, quite frankly. I could imagine, I think a Tony Scott version of this movie would be probably much more engaging and fascinating. But yeah, I think, we got a whole other movie to talk about. So let's go into our final thoughts here. Tori, any final lingering thoughts on Last King of Scotland?
Nothing more than what's already been said. It's a decent movie carried by a magnificent performance by a magnificent actor. So an Oscar film, but you know what I mean. But but other than that, I'm glad to have finally saw it. Finally kind of crossed that one off the old bucket list of films, if you will. But yeah, it was decent movie, magnificent performance, like I just said. So
Yeah, like I said earlier, I think the big thing I want to emphasize is this is the true power of Whittaker is his ability to like skirt this over into being a movie I somehow liked. Because it has all of, like the earmarks of like a bad Oscar bait movie that I would like normally just say like, oh fuck this shit. I'm glad it's kind of been forgotten to history. But this is one of those rare examples where like, oh, the lead performance actually carries it, because some people try and do that all the time with like movies where, especially where it tends to be like, oh, the one actor won his award, but everything else wasn't really one. Like I just recently watched Scent of a Woman, the Al Pacino movie. And a lot of people say like, oh, that movie might be flawed, but Al Pacino's performance is so great in it. And I'm just going to say here, no. That movie fucking sucks, and it's not a great Pacino performance. It does not carry that dumb movie over into being anything like watchable to me. As opposed to like Last King of Scotland, I think that's very much the case with Whittaker's performance. He's like so fascinating and enigmatic, and I get why he was sort of like the guy who not only won the Oscar, but that entire award season, he was just racking up like Golden Globe, BAFTA, like all that shit. And it totally made sense why he kind of steamrolled. Because it's an undeniable performance, and even if we had to get it in this not quite that good package, I'm at least glad this performance at least was able to come out of such a flawed overall product. But let's go ahead and get into our bad movie here with Repo Men.
It's compact, it's safe, it's comfortable, everything you want in a new liver. The price, $756,000.
Let me just reassure you that our credit department will find a plan that fits your lifestyle.
He'll sign it. Everybody signs it. But what they don't tell you is if you can't pay the bills, some union man will break into your house and reclaim our property.
I can pay.
Sorry, that's not my department. My name's Remy. That's my best friend, Jake. We grew up together, and now we work together.
Yeah, a job's a job.
We're always gonna be Repo.
Hey, you're a very lucky man, you know that? What you're looking at here is the new heart module, top of the line.
Get it out.
No time at all. You're gonna be back on your game. You're gonna be knocking them down. You've done this 1,000 times. What is wrong with you?
Falling behind on payments.
Your repo. They'll come for you, too.
Who do you think Frank's gonna send after me?
Maybe me.
Repo Men.
So Repo Men came out March 19th, 2010, from director Miguel Sapochnik, and is based on the novel The Repossession Mambo, which at least is like the source material. It was written by one of the two screenwriters, Eric Garcia, though a lot of people kind of at the time, and I even remember like when this was coming out, I hadn't seen this before, but when it was coming out, I kind of was like, wait, didn't we just kind of do that with Repo the Genetic Opera, which had been a movie that came out 2 years prior, but then even then had been a stage show for like about a decade prior to that. And, a lot of people kind of had the weird comparisons and were just like, oh, we're just ripping this off and doing it in a very like bizarre, uninteresting way. And Torrey, do you agree with that sentiment about Repo Men? Because, whenever you come on the show, you tend to be the positive light when we talk about bad movies. You're like, I don't know, guys, it wasn't that bad. Was this that bad?
Yeah, this actually might have been the first time I've been on this show where it's a bad movie that I've actually like fucking hated. Man, 2010 was like a very active year for me, like film wise. Like you and I were both on spill, and I remember like kind of before life kind of hit me in the face and I had to focus on other things and I could just focus on film. This was like one of those last couple of years I really had of investing my time into movies and stuff. And I remember seeing a lot of the trailers for this film, and it made it look so fucking interesting, like a black comedy with Jude Law and Forest Whitaker seemingly having great chemistry together in a film that's about repoing people's organs. This should be the shit. Let's fucking go. Let's watch this movie. I didn't get a chance to see it in theaters, but like many films I watched in 2010, Redbox. Watched it, and I just find it funny that the two movies we've watched today are just basically Forest Whitaker being the world's shittiest best friend, because man This movie is like a fucked up SpongeBob episode. Like there's the episode of SpongeBob where he's like, yo, I'm gonna live with the jellyfish. And then Patrick is so brokenhearted over it that he's gonna literally try to catch him as if he's a jellyfish and force him into a jar. That is literally Forest Whitaker this entire fucking movie. He is fucking psychotic.
You know, if I'm going to get a live action Patrick Star, I think Forest Whitaker's a pretty good bet. If we ever make that unwise decision, I think that's a pretty good casting decision. I want to hear Forest Whitaker say, but I thought we were special. He'll win his second Oscar for Patrick Star, I'm sure.
Oh my god. Oh dude, fuck this movie. It's just like Jude Law is just an asshole, and he is like it's weird because it's like, you know, that sort of like bully and then becomes best friend dynamic is something that like there's interesting shit this movie could have like the story could have told, you know, and it could have just had the repo organs just be kind of like a background to it, like, you know, about people who come back from war and don't know where they can apply their skills into real like everyday life, and like the feeling of loneliness and not having like that true friendship. And this film could have been like that friendship film, but it doesn't know what the fuck it wants to be. It wants to be like a statement on healthcare. It wants to be a buddy cop movie. It wants to be a black comedy. It wants to rip off like 7 fucked up like crime movies. Like for 1 minute, it's like it's Old Boy. Then it's Repo the Genetic Opera. You know, then it's Total Recall.
And then it becomes Brazil at the end, especially.
And then it becomes fucking Brazil at the end, which is what pissed me off when I watched it as a 19-year-old. And I'm still pissed off now as a 32-year-old watching this film again. It's just, that's the only thing. I was like, you know what, man? I'm glad my anger is still there when I see shitty fucking movies like this, because that's exactly what this is. But there was so much potential. Jude Law and Forest Whitaker are so fucking good together. Like they are perfect together. They're just 2 douchebags doing a douchebag job, which is repoing organs. And I wish they kind of just stuck to that. You know what I mean? Instead of trying to be like, it felt like they have to make a statement on corporations or, you know, try to do like anything that had a message. The minute this film stops being a black comedy is when it stops being fun, and it's like 20 minutes into the movie.
Well, especially when like that stuff you're talking about, I agree with you. I think the first 20 minutes or so was kind of like, oh, this could be a bit like interesting as like a dark satirical movie about the fact that like our main character Jude Law is a guy who not only like does this repo job but kind of gets off on it, which I found fascinating. Like him and Whittaker literally are doing stuff like they're having a big like barbecue at Jude Law's house, and then it's like, oh shit, wait, apparently like I just scanned around, we're off duty, but I scanned around, that guy is behind on his payments. Let's go ahead and fuck with him. Like this guy who's like driving the taxi nearby, and they like repo him very quickly while this like family barbecue's going on. That is the stuff I'm like, okay, this is fascinating. And even we were talking about like, oh, if it's trying to make a statement on corporations, making that movie where that guy who's your main character is making a statement in an interesting way that still like is entertaining and fascinating. And I agree with you, like the chemistry between Jude Law and Forest Whitaker is definitely like, oh yeah, these are 2 people who should not be friends, but became friends because like they established it's like, oh, they met during like the war and they kind of became best buddies. And it's like, they know probably in their heart of hearts, it's like, we're bad for each other. We bring out the worst in each other, but this guy's loyal to me. Like we're buds. We can't not do that. Like there's a whole bit where they go to the bar at one point and Forest Whitaker talks about like, you know what, man, I'd repo, you know, an organ from my grandma if I could. Don't tell her, but I mean, I'd do it. You know, I'd fucking do it in a heartbeat. Like that's a horrible, awful, shitty thing that anyone could say. But you get that chemistry with those 2 words. I see why they've had this friendship for so long. But I agree with you that like specifically, it's all the stuff with once Alice Braga becomes a part of the movie as this woman who initially was like a nightclub singer that Jude Law heard, and then like him realizing, like, I don't even remember, like, how does he get a conscience in this fucking movie all of a sudden where he's like, oh, wait a minute, this is bad. I shouldn't do that. I think it's just like, it's after his wife breaks up with him, basically. Then he just suddenly starts realizing like, oh, wait, it's a bad thing I take organs. I shouldn't do that. And then, oh, this hot lady is like homeless now because she's trying to, you know, run away from like people who are trying to track down her organs. Oh my God, what have I been doing this whole time? It's like, I don't believe that for a fucking second, dude. This is dumb.
Yeah, it's like the movie decides, like, it's like after the first 20 minutes, the movie got fucking scared of itself. like literally scared of itself, because it was like, well, maybe we're just being too mean and we're being too black of a comedy. And it's like, no, you didn't even go past the fucking 10-yard line. You're still in your starting part of the field. You're still in your starting end zone of the fucking field. You haven't done anything. You moved up 10 yards. You've been stuck at the 10-yard line. In the last hour and a half is you like feeling bad that you went 10 yards upfield, using shitty sports analogies here. But like, I don't know, like I just wish this film could have, like, instead of falling into like stupid pitfalls and ripping off better movies and taking advantage of its leads, it decides to just do stupid shit like rip off fucking better movies and completely waste its leads. Even Alice Braga's good in it. I buy Alice Braga and Jude Law together as far as like being a couple. They have good chemistry. They have better chemistry than he has with the actress who plays his wife. And I could almost buy him becoming like him getting a conscience, because it's like he now has to deal with the fact that he has like an artificial organ. It's like slowing him down to the point where he can't even do his job as effectively. And I wish they would explore that as far as like him post having the issue with his heart, having to get the heart transplant, having it affect his performance as both a repo man and as a salesman. They still kind of had an interesting thing they could have went there, but no, they just went with the whole like, well, he's gonna have remorse now, and now he's gonna slowly but surely rebel against the system. And I was just like, but you didn't even earn that. This is coward shit. What are we doing?
Right,
with
you're
this
right.
movie
That's
right
around
now?
the time where they start to like, where it's like, oh, all of a sudden I'm affected, therefore I suddenly realize it. But even then, earlier on, like the sequence where like he ends up getting that like fake organ because of like the accident he has with like the shocker and whatnot over RZA, who is like this guy who like is a musician that he likes, and it's like, oh man, wow, I guess I gotta extract this from you, but I love your dope beats. Fucking Jude Law come out there with his Tintin ass hair, just like, oh, I love your sick beats, RZA. We gotta like really collab here. Interesting. The RZA Forest Whitaker reunion, weirdly, despite the fact they don't share scenes at all in this movie, is interesting. But yeah, that whole switch where just like, all of a sudden, because I'm affected, I'm supposed to like, but you could even still go in like the dark comedy of that element where it's like, oh no, I care about myself, but I don't have like empathy for other people. That's the problem. Is like when Alice Braga ends up becoming that, even if they have chemistry, it's still just such a dumb fucking turn where it's like, well, I can't be with my wife, Melisandre from Game of Thrones. By the way, that's who that actress is. And
okay.
yeah. And it's like, oh no, I can't be with her anymore because she's disgusted by my sick fascination with extracting organs from people. Women, am I right? But then they try and do like that whole thing where it's like, oh no, now I have empathy for Alice Braga, who has like several different like organs that she's had to replace, and now I feel bad because this hot lady who likes me now is like potentially gonna die because she sang a song, which I love that too, that it's like that it's a song that like is like a very classic jazz standard, and he's like, has anyone heard this song before? It's like Cry Me a River, right? It's that fucking song. And it's like, dude, yeah, everyone's heard that song. That's a very familiar fucking like jazz standard that anyone's heard at least once in their life. And he's just like, I've never heard this before. Like, sure, okay.
Is this what love is like? No. But like,
is this what humans call love?
Can I repo these feelings? No, but oh my God. Oh, why was this fucking cowardly piece of shit made? It's just like, man, I would have rather have had them go down the road of making this a cruel ass movie where it's just about a guy. You could have made this a character study. You could have literally made it a character study of him going through the motions and dealing with shit that, you know, the people he was like literally collecting organs from would be going through. And it would have been interesting to have it as a character study of him trying to go through day-to-day life, like seeing his shit get affected, which is good because he's a piece of shit. So you kind of want to see him go through like the lowest of the low. The lowest of the low is not collecting scrap metal and getting to fuck Alice Braga. It's not. There's and then having like old boy ripoff hallway fight scenes with knives and shit. Like there isn't. There's nothing I cared about this entire time, and I was just like, nothing I cared about.
Yeah, we really need to address like, so spoilers for this fucking old ass movie that you probably have not seen. Don't give a shit about, everybody out there, but as Tori's mentioning, like after they go through a bunch of things where they try and go into the black market and they try and like get Alice Braga like new organs and stuff like that, they eventually get to like, oh, we have to like do a face off after a certain point where like Jude Law gets like knocked out, and he's like, oh, you know what, I gotta like go back to the main source, and then he has like this badass like hallway fight, and he kills a bunch of people like Liev Schreiber, who's his boss, and like a bunch of other people down this hallway. And then the whole twist is like, oh, he has his happy ending, and he gets to like leave with Alice Braga and Forest Whitaker. They like all go off to like this fancy island, and then it turns out, oh wait, no, this was actually a twist, because earlier on they had established this like new technology about like, oh, you can put this memory in your head where you think you're living in paradise for forever, and it's just like you're like in a permanent coma. And that's what Forest Whitaker has done for Jude Law after he basically like knocks him out like earlier in the movie. So the last like 30 minutes or so of this movie is actually a big dream that's going on. And like I mentioned before, it's such a ripoff of Brazil, but also like the key difference with like Brazil, where they have that kind of ending, is like the movie prior to like that sort of turn is actually like a very upsetting, dark, like not Hollywood movie whatsoever. And then the Hollywood ending happens, and you're like, oh my god, like this is taking a turn for the weird, and this doesn't really make sense with like what happened earlier, and it's because, oh, this is a fantasy. As opposed to pretty much everything after the first 20 minutes of this movie is Hollywood pablum bullshit. Like, just, oh my god, we gotta like get out of here, like me and Alice Braga, we're gonna face off against the world, and my buddy Forest Whitaker might capture me, I don't know what's gonna happen. And yeah, so that makes all that shit near the end where it's like, oh, it's a bit more over the top than what we'd seen before, but it doesn't actually work with like the way you made this film prior at all.
Like I said before, this movie should have stayed mean. If this movie stayed mean, made it a character study, made it hard about him being able to carry on his job, and then like the ending is like him harvesting all of Alice Braga's organs for one big score so he can get back in the good graces of his company. I would have rather have had that shit happen than like the fucking ending to Brain Candy. Like, like I would have rather have had that. I would have rather have had like, you know, more like literally Brazil, Brain Candy, all these type of movies or whatever. I would have rather have had like a Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer ripoff, which would have fit this movie and fit these actors and fit this like chemistry a fuck ton better than trying to be like every other good sci-fi film at the time, which is what this fucking movie does. And it's just a waste. Like, it's a waste for like this kind of black comedy, the same way that like Law-Abiding Citizen is a waste for the crime drama or for like the legal procedure drama or whatever. It could have been something, but it decided to just go for the half-assed Hollywood route. Like almost like a safety blanket, if you will, and it's fucking disappointing because this could have been a real I feel like there's a really good movie and a really good idea here, and they just fucking squandered it.
Yeah, I mean, even, you know, like I mentioned earlier, like Repo the Genetic Opera, like I don't necessarily agree with people who say like, oh, this is a ripoff. I think just because it feels more like parallel thinking with that particular concept. Like even there was a point where they're watching the Monty Python's The Meaning of Life, which has literally like that whole sketch where it's John Cleese and Graham Chapman, like, can we have your liver? And they like harvest it out of Terry Gilliam's fucking body while he's living. So like this idea isn't 100% original necessarily, even before Repo. But like at least with like a Repo the Genetic Opera, which is like a much lower budget movie and a much more like sort of like you mentioned, it's a meaner movie, and it's also like this big like elaborate Rocky Horror style like horror musical element. Like that's a movie that sticks to its convictions, no matter how like kind of inept it could be sometimes, like the production of it. It still feels like, oh, it wants to like really commit to like this very gory, very over the top operatic conceit of like these people who like harvest organs, and then like how that affects like people around them, and this weird succession thing about the main person who runs the company and shit like that. But this movie, yeah, it just feels like it definitely is like this basic concept that sounds like it could be daring and interesting, and kind of is for the first 20 minutes, just becomes really like dull, forgettable pablum that's really a bummer considering everybody here, including like, I'm curious with Jude Law, we've talked about this many times on the show, that Jude Law kind of feels like a guy where he was put constantly in sort of like starring roles in big movies, and this feels like one of the last examples of that to me, because he really just feels more like a very handsome character actor. He's so much better in like supporting roles as opposed to being like the lead. Would you agree with that in general with Jude Law?
I've always been like back and forth, or I guess you could say fickle when it comes to Jude Law, because like, you know, he's great in movies like Road to Perdition, but then he gives you shit like Alfie. Because I think even this year, it was 2010, I think he was in Dr. Parnassus, right? Wasn't he one of like the transformations post Heath Ledger's death in that movie? because it was him, fucking Johnny Depp,
and Colin Farrell, right?
and
yes.
Colin Farrell. Yeah, exactly. So it's like, it's not like, you know, him being a character actor isn't something out of the ordinary. I mean, I think after Alfie, everyone kind of knew what he was.
But because it was particularly that 2004 where it was like, it was Alfie, Sky Captain,
which I love.
Yeah, sure. Okay.
Yeah.
He did like 6 different fucking movies in 2004 where they tried to make him like, you're the new hotness, you're the biggest guy, as opposed to, like, I agree with you that like the roles that made him work are like Road to Perdition or AI. I love him as like Gigolo Joe, stuff like that, where he's a supporting character and he's amazing at it. He's just like, it's that trouble where it's like, oh no, you have the handsome face, so we have to make you the lead. It's like, no, man, that's not what he works as. And I think he's gotten more into kind of like, yeah, if I'm going to be the lead, it's going to be in something a bit weirder and a bit more off-center, as opposed to, you know, like this, where it feels like, oh, we got, you know, it's a, you know, a $30 million budget movie back when Hollywood made those. So now we got to like have you be like the star and we have to like market the whole movie around you. It's like, nah, man, he doesn't need to be that.
So what you're saying is we need to make a Sky Captain sequel.
I mean, you know, you could probably make a similar comparable looking movie at this point on your home computer with that. But yeah, I don't know. This one, it's a bummer also considering Miguel Sapochnik is actually a pretty interesting director in terms of like, he's mostly known more for television at this point because he's a guy who's directed like a lot of Game of Thrones, like particularly some of the bigger episodes that people are aware of with Game of Thrones. But also like a bunch of other things like House of the Dragon recently, Master of Sex, True Detective. Like, he's a guy who's, like, very accomplished in television, but he's only done this, and then the next movie he did was fairly recently, that one Tom Hanks movie where he builds a robot companion in the post-apocalypse, Finch. Were you aware this movie existed?
I wasn't aware until I looked at his filmography, because I was like, what other movies did this guy do? Because I could see something of a vision when I'm watching Repo Men. And then I saw this movie called Finch, and it was like an Apple original. I was like, well, no wonder I don't watch anything the Apple. I'm not subbed to that shit.
Oh, that's why it doesn't exist. It was released on a streaming service no one really fucking subscribes to unless they watch Ted Lasso. Like, that's it.
Exactly. And I've never been a Game of Thrones guy. Like, I've seen some episodes or whatever. I mean, I think I might have seen you know what? I did see the Battle of the Bastards episode.
Right. That's the big one he did, was the Battle of the Bastards one.
Which is a really good piece of television. Fair enough, you know what I mean? But other than that, like, no, it's just like, I mean, did you see Finch or whatever it's called?
No, I didn't see Finch. I have Apple Plus and I haven't seen Finch.
The punchline to this whole thing. But yeah, no. It's just interesting to me because, like, I mean, this guy's obviously made great television and he's only really got the director's shot twice. Again, like, my anger when it comes to this movie comes from just like the potential squandered. And I don't even know if it's his fault. Like, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, this could be the result of studio meddling, which makes sense considering the multitude of directions that this film seems to go, but never really wants to commit to.
Though I am surprised at the same time, like, a studio would allow even like that ending to happen. Because the movie almost feels like it's kind of commenting, it's trying to do like what Brazil did, where it's just like, oh, we're going to make this seem like a big Hollywood happy ending, but then it turns out we have this subversion here. It almost feels like the studio ignored the bookends of the movie, where it's just like, oh yeah, sure, the first 20 minutes, whatever, yeah, last 30 minutes, whatever. We have to focus on this middle chunk, where this guy's unlikable. So then, I guess we're supposed to feel bad when he ends up being in like a permanent coma or whatever. And it's like, no. I don't feel bad for that guy. Fuck him.
No, he's an asshole. But I mean, like, I really wish they would have given him an ending worthy of a guy who's an asshole that would have led to, like, you know, that would have given like a journey. You know what I mean? I'd rather have a film about a guy who's an asshole who gets down on his luck and then gets back to where he is, which is being an asshole.
Yeah, instead of him being saved by the leader of the resistance played by Yvette Nicole Brown, which was like, whoa, wait, surely.
Out of fucking nowhere. Out of fucking nowhere, by the way. I was just like, I mean, I'm glad you got, yeah, fine. I'll give you gave me a little bit more, give me a second wind, if you will, or at least a quarter of a second wind. I do find it funny that this is the second, though, because we got to mention our guy, you know, go back to the Spawn episode. We got to mention the man himself, the John Leguizamo appearance. That means nothing, but it's still John Leguizamo. He's not eating any maggot pizza, but...
I'm curious about this because the big thing with Leguizamo is I don't think he's in the cut I saw, which was the like regular cut. I believe he's in the unrated cut. That's like about 8 minutes longer. Because when I watched it, he was not in there at all. I saw he was in this movie. I'm like, oh, I guess we'll see Leguizamo for a scene. I did not see him.
Oh yeah. But the one I got off when I saw this back when I was back in 2010 was the unrated cut that they had on every like Redbox you could find this movie at, because Redbox was promoting the shit out of this movie when they finally got their hands on it. But yeah, it's like literally his whole thing is that he's shown there to like he's supposed to like help Alice Braga's character because like he's someone that she used to have a thing with or whatever, and he tells him to go to the surgeon, the two surgeons that have the same name, and it's like a 10-year-old performing surgery, which is actually a fun scene. I gotta say.
That's one of the funner things. I agree. That feels like the most sort of like the black comedy element of it. It's like this little girl who like starts, who's like very good at like removing organs and she like literally gets an organ now and she's like, yay. I'm like, that's kind of fun. Where was this?
Exactly. It's like it feels that's where I was like, oh, we're getting that Total Recall feeling back, and it kind of works here, like when they're doing the surgery, and I was just like, this is fucking cool. I like this here. But that's the lead into the fight where Whittaker like knocks Jude Law out. Is because they go back to his apartment and they find his organs completely like repoed, and that's because he owed money too, or owed shit, and Forest Whitaker came in and just repoed the fuck out of him. So he's a plot device again. We were talking about plot devices earlier. He's just a plot device. So yeah.
But before we close out, I am curious, like, what do you think sort of works for Whittaker here? Where like it definitely feels like he's kind of like third build, but he doesn't have like a lot of screen time. But do you think he sort of makes the most out of even like a lesser movie like this?
Absolutely, because I mean the thing that I buy throughout this entire movie is that he loves being this guy's best friend, even though, like you said before, they're fucking bad for each other. That ending scene, the thing that I do like about it is the fact that he is indeed filled with sorrow, that he is essentially killed the quality of life for his best friend from a thing that was ultimately his big plan to keep his best friend. His plan to keep his best friend fucking failed. And that's sad. That's like a really sad fucking thing, even for psychopaths like those two, and I buy and I was like, I kind of sat there the whole time and I was just like, it's a damn shame they couldn't just did the thing together, did the heist together. But then again, you wouldn't get the whole like shitty subplot of Jude Law trying to redeem himself or whatever the fuck this movie was trying to tell me. But as far as Whittaker's performance himself, he's one half of like the great leads that this film has, because like I said, I buy that they're best friends. I believe that they're best friends, and I believe that he wants to stay his best friend in this line of work. And that's the one positive that I'll take away from that ending. Immediately he knows that he done fucked up. He doesn't have his friend anymore, and he's gonna have to, like in the show Cowboy Bebop, he's gonna have to carry that weight. And that came through clear through a shitty ending, but it came through clear nonetheless.
Yeah, it's a real testament to like Whittaker's abilities as an actor, especially that like he can make such a like nothing character actually have a lot more of that pathos that you're talking about. Even as like they're going around and doing like the real seedy shit, like they go around, they spot that one guy who's like eating a hot dog, and it's like, hey, you better pay your stuff by like in 2 days or else we're gonna get you. And it's like, oh yeah, the check's in the mail. Like, sure, buddy. Sure it is. Like, he feels authentic, like, oh, like, he's embodying perfectly, like, the asshole kind of cop character. Which I think that's the thing, is like, oh, when this movie tries to, like, kind of differentiate itself from, like, where it's like, oh, we're gonna do something different with, like, this sci-fi, satirical, dark comedy conceit. And it's like, I don't know, this feels more like a generic cop movie than it does, like, interesting satire, which I think is, like, the biggest bummer. And I think Whittaker tries his best within that, even Jude Law does. Like, this cast is, like, not sleeping through it necessarily, but they can't really do much. And those are my final thoughts. Unless, Tori, do you have anything to add as final thoughts for Repo Men?
No, not really. Anybody who thinks that this movie, and I have seen some of your Letterboxd reviews, people, and I have seen these YouTube clips of you people claiming that this is some deep, profound fucking movie that Hollywood was keeping under wraps or under the hatchet. No, this was Hollywood. This was 2010. This was a Hollywood sci-fi film in 2010, not trying to be deep, but it was trite. Okay, don't fucking defend this. How dare you fucking try to defend this film as this like underrated cult, like could be cult classic. It doesn't deserve to be a cult classic. It deserves to be shat upon because it's a piece of shit and a waste of time.
Yeah, that's the big thing is like that's the big thing is like whenever, because like there's this sort of continued, like I'm very much like I support at least the idea of this where it's like, oh, I want to return to a point where like Hollywood would make $30 million budget movies like this. Because, like, the $30 million budget is kind of, like, wasted away as Hollywood has gone either for, we have to have a $200 million giant blockbuster, or we can do like $5 million or below budget, like Blumhouse, very small budget movie that we know will make money, as opposed to, I don't know, if we spend more than that, it's not going to really like work out. And like, I want to like go back to that kind of period, but at the same time, going back and seeing like, you know, a decade plus later, like, oh, this like small movie that like it wasn't a big blockbuster, so you all didn't see it. It's like, no, I think people didn't see it because, as it turns out, it was pretty fucking bad. I think if anything, these are the kind of movies that killed that kind of like fun mid-budget genre movie that Hollywood used to make. Kind of these movies that are like, oh, these are like not leaving any kind of blip on the radar, so just kind of like a waste of time and money for the studio. So like, oh, we can't do any more of these. It feels like it's kind of like one of those examples where it just feels like, yeah, if anything, this is one of the problems where it's just like, if you're going to make one of these $30 million movies again, if we want to have more of those, we got to make them at least like fun and interesting. Not the best movie ever made, but just like kind of fun and junky, but in a way that at least kind of like has some personality and is interesting, as opposed to like this very much dreck. And I agree with you, it's fucking bad. For sure.
To the people out there that like want to hold this film on a fucking pedestal, want to watch a $30 million movie that actually gave me false hope as a fan around this time, District fucking 9. Watch District 9. That's your $30 million film that got Oscar nominated, shoved its foot right up the ass of Hollywood with all the big budgeted bullshit that was coming out of 2009. This film came out of nowhere. That's the movie. That's the film to have your kind of your rebellious front as far as putting something on a pedestal to say fuck Hollywood to.
Or even like if you want to do that with like a movie that's out like now that you could support if it's like still in like a local theater to you, Beau is Afraid. That's a $35 million budget movie that is very much like an anti-mainstream movie on every single regard, and it's amazing, and I loved it. And that's like a true like giant middle finger to like whatever you think like Hollywood perception is. That's an amazing movie. So go like support that instead of just being like, remember Repo Men though? That was cool. It's like, no, fuck that. Go see the Ari Aster movie. Do that instead.
For the people, it's like, oh, this was a deep statement on healthcare. I was like, Saw 6 came out like not even 6 months before. And that was a movie that
actually is a much better statement on healthcare for sure.
Exactly.
Genuinely, 100%. But you know, let's get into the weekly segment, the double redo. Double redo.
Double redo. Double redo. Double redo. Double redo. Double redo.
That works. So the double redo is a segment that Adam and I usually do, in which we recommend one good movie and then dissuade you from one bad movie related to the topic. I have 2 options, and so does Torrey. And so we'll go ahead and I'll start off here with my 2 for Forest Whitaker, where my good pick is a movie that I hadn't seen until fairly recently, but I thought was pretty great. It's called A Rage in Harlem, from director Bill Duke. Yes, Bill Duke of Predator fame, amongst other things. The actor has a very robust directorial career. I recently talked about Deep Cover on the segment like about a month ago. We did our Lawrence Fishburne episode, and I've only seen like this one and Deep Cover, and I'm starting to realize like, oh yeah, Bill Duke's kind of like a very underrated director, because basically A Rage in Harlem, it takes place in 1920s era Harlem, and we initially focus on like this group of gangsters. It's mostly a black cast, and it's like this group of black gangsters in the middle of like a big deal, and all of a sudden the cops storm in and start shooting up the place, their little like hideout, and so everyone starts running around, including Robin Givens, who plays this gangster's mall of a woman character, who ends up like vacating the premises over to Harlem because she's looking for this gold trunk that's in one of the apartments down there in Harlem. And along the way, she ends up running into Forest Whitaker, who plays this morgue attendant who's very like sort of religious and very like soft-spoken, very nerdy, and ends up, you know, shacking up with him as a way to kind of get into his apartment building so that she can end up stealing that big gold trunk. It's really not available to stream, and it's such a bummer because I think this movie is kind of amazing. I think it has some issues where you can tell that the original script was trying to be a bit more comedic in tone, and I think it doesn't, like, the comedic stuff kind of works, but I don't think it's like nearly as interesting as like when it just becomes like a really fascinating sort of like noir crime movie. that's like so fascinating to watch, especially with Whittaker, who I think is like the best of the comedic stuff, because he literally was like very nerdy, very nebbishy, shy, and just like, oh, I want to trust in Jesus and everything. But the moment Robin Givens comes into his life, and they have an amazing, very weird sex scene in which you literally see like a one whole shot of like Robin Givens like all like from her head all the way down to her bare ass, and then Forest Whitaker licks one of her cheeks. It's kind of sexy, but it's also just bizarre and weird, but kind of awesome. And the thing is, it's got an amazing stacked cast besides, like, you got Givens and Whittaker, but also Gregory Hines is in here. You got Danny Glover, Zakes Moke, who was the guy in The Serpent and the Rainbow. T.K. Carter, very young Wendell Pierce shows up. George Wallace even shows up, the comedian, at a certain point. It's very well directed, very stylish. There's a lot of great like chase scenes and shootout scenes, and just the style of it looks so immersed in like that 20s era sort of sorry, it's actually 50s. I'm mistaken. I apologize. It's a 50s era, and it feels like so wonderful. And just, like I said, it's a very underrated masterpiece I would recommend to anybody out there. And then my bad pick is a movie that Whittaker doesn't have like a huge role in, but it kind of feels indicative of a lot of the movies he was doing around like this 90s period, where he would just pop up in like a sixth lead, basically, in, you know, this movie that often starred a bunch of white people who weren't that interesting. It was sadly like a sort of token character. And in this case, I have Consenting Adults, which mainly follows Kevin Kline, who plays this guy who is very much like a typical 90s yuppie, where he like writes music for commercial jingles, and he ends up, you know, he's living this life with his wife, Mary Elizabeth Mastronio. Apologies, I always fuck up that name. They're having a fun time in, you know, suburbia with their daughter, but a new neighbor moves in, who's another reason why I'd recommend you not watch this movie, played by Kevin Spacey. That's right. They become friends, him and Kevin Kline, and it's like, you know, oh, we're going to like run together, we'll go to bars together, we'll hang out at each other's houses. And Kevin Spacey is like very weird and aggressive. Like there's a whole scene where he commits insurance fraud and gets like run over by a car. And then he's just like, oh, guess what? I'm fine. I didn't actually get hurt by that car. It's all cool. I just wanted the insurance money. But we're still bros, right? It's like, yeah, I guess, dude, sure. Whatever. But at a certain point, he suggests to Kevin Kline, hey, you know, it'd be really fun. What if we swapped wives? But we're not even like swinging in like that intentional way. What we're going to do is I want you to sneak into my house and lie next to my wife in our bed. And I want you to like kind of in a half awake state fuck her while she doesn't know. And I'm going to do the same thing with your wife. And Kevin Kline's like, yeah, sure, let's do that. And he ends up going along with that and goes up, you know, into Kevin Spacey's house and everything. And then the next morning, he realizes that Kevin Spacey's wife has been murdered, and he's charged with murder. And it's like, oh my god, how's he gonna get out of this situation? His wife, wants to divorce him, and she ends up hooking up with Kevin Spacey. And Forest Whitaker plays like the detective who's trying to get him like out of jail. But the big problem is like, I don't know, the 90s were, I guess, a different time, but I think anyone in the 90s would also think like, hey, Kevin Kline, how about you stay in jail with your intentions of like, yeah, I'm gonna go along with this weird conceit of I'm gonna go up to this woman while she's asleep and have sex with her without her realizing that I'm not her husband. Like, you went in with that perception, even though Kevin Spacey ended up framing you for murder. You're still awful. And really, like, I don't want to, like, fucking follow you, dude. And I love Kevin Kline. It's very, like, much like a Hollywood Pictures kind of era movie where it's, like, it's junky. It looks good. It's directed by Alan J. Pakula, who's a guy who's more famous for directing, like, All the President's Men and Clute and The Parallax View, like some of the great 70s paranoia thrillers. And this is one of his last movies, and it's like a really junky, bad, like sort of era, post Fatal Attraction, those kind of like yuppie thrillers that were around all the time. And this is one of the worst examples of it. And also that Forest Whitaker, who just kind of comes in for like 2 or 3 scenes just being like, hey, Kevin Kline, this is really suspicious. I'm going to get you cleared. Yeah, sure. Sure, Forrest, you can do that. But I would not recommend Consenting Adults by any stretch.
I mean, Consenting Adults, Kevin Spacey. I mean, okay. I'm kind of intrigued to see it. You've probably told me before about my morbid curiosity for these kind of films. So yeah.
I mean, I want to emphasize that movie's also very boring, despite what I said. After like the weird setup, it's just kind of like, I don't even give a shit what's going on here. But Tori, what about your choices for the double redo?
Okay, for the double redo for the good, I have a film here that I feel like is underrated, doesn't get talked about a lot. Amazing cast. So it's directed by Doug McHenry. Now, Doug McHenry and the late Gerald Jackson were responsible for producing a lot of black cinema, like New Jack City, A Thin Line Between Love and Hate, the House Party movies, Crush Groove, and they also produced and McHenry directed this movie here called Jason's Lyric, which I mentioned a little bit before in the episode. This stars Alan Payne, Jada Pinkett, Bokeem Woodbine, Treach from Naughty by Nature, Eddie Griffin, and of course Forest Whitaker. It's kind of like this weird romantic, psychological, but also weirdly erotic kind of a film where it's based on two brothers who are dealing with the childhood trauma of their abusive alcoholic father, Mad Dog, portrayed by Forest Whitaker. And Bokeem Woodbine plays the younger brother who is in more of the destructive path as far as his life and dealing with his trauma, as opposed to the older brother portrayed by Alan Payne, who's in, the show House of Pain, who is a very responsible young black man in the third ward of Houston, Texas, and feels that he can't move on with his life, with the love of his life, played by Jada Pinkett Smith, because he's still kind of tied to a feeling of responsibility to both his mother and his brother because of unfortunate trauma at the hands of their father. And it's a very interesting film of how it deals with trauma. The performances are really good too. And it's especially Bokeem Woodbine who steals the show, and obviously Forest Whitaker, but Forest Whitaker is, in the beginning of the movie, he's more of like the catalyst or the start for like all the events that happen. Excellent, very underrated movie from the 90s. Doesn't get enough props because I never even hear people really talking about it outside of, black cinema circles. So that would be my good. My bad, and I it's hard as far as like picking a bad Forest Whitaker film that obviously isn't Repo Men. But I hate the film Phenomenon from 1997 with John Travolta. That to me counts as a bad Forest Whitaker movie. I know he's not like in top billing necessarily, but I don't know. That film is like just the epitome of schmaltz. It's just a dumb fantasy film. I never liked it as a kid, and I still don't like it now as an adult. I know it was like this big super success, but I don't know. Yeah, it's just boring to me. It's just a bad overall movie to me. So that's what I would give to Forest Whitaker.
Yeah, I have not seen either of your picks. I hadn't even honestly heard of the Jason Lyrics until you were talking about it, really. And that sounds fascinating. I'd be curious to see it. And Phenomenon is a weird one where, like, I'm vaguely aware of that movie, but I always get it confused with the other 1996 John Travolta kind of supernatural movie, Michael, where he plays an angel.
Oh, the angel one?
I know,
yeah.
Right, and because the other one, the Phenomenon, is like he ends up getting like telekinetic powers, right?
Yeah, he has telekinetic powers, yeah, as a result of like a brain injury or a brain aneurysm or something like that.
Right, so it's like Flowers for Algernon, but with Carrie, which is interesting given the Travolta of it all as well on that. Yeah, for sure. I just want to shout out, Adam had picked some double redo choices that we didn't end up, obviously he wasn't here for this, but I do just want to shout out what he had wanted to pick for good and bad. Was his good choice was Ghost Dog Way of the Samurai, which we've talked about on the show before, an amazing movie that I completely support. I love that fucking movie. And then his bad pick was Battlefield Earth, which we've also covered on the show. And is, I think, also interesting considering it kind of also it's another John Travolta Forest Whitaker collab, and also is kind of like another like sort of weird toxic friend thing with like him and Travolta as the fucking the turtle and the other guy. I haven't forgot those fucking species, whatever that dumb thing is. But yeah, those were his choices as well, and I think those are so. Especially, I love Ghost Dog. I rewatched it recently because I got that Criterion Blu-ray. And that movie, it's become like one of my favorite movies. That movie fucking rules.
Oh yeah, I mean, I remember thinking it was the coolest shit as a kid because they used a lot of the promotion was used with like they had a lot of trailer commercials out where like RZA was kind of leading the charge on it as far as like him like promoting the movie, because I'm not sure if he had done like the score for it or if he was responsible for the soundtrack. It was so long
he like
ago.
was the soundtrack producer on that, so he put together a lot of the songs that were on there.
Yeah, exactly. And he was doing a lot of like, I remember watching like old episodes of Rap City in the basement or Rap City where he was like promoting the movie. And it's so, dude, it's so good. And it's like, I feel like it was just not appreciated at the time, but I'm glad that it has like this status, this like cult status, and even people at the time who appreciate it. I remember even Ebert really appreciating and singing high of its praises. So there were definitely people who were like, putting it out there, but what a classic of a movie.
For sure. But let's repeat our titles for anybody out there in case you want to, add some to your watch list or remove some. The good pick that I had was A Rage in Harlem. And the bad pick I had was Consenting Adults. And then Adam's good pick was Ghost Dog Way of the Samurai. And his bad pick was Battlefield Earth.
And for my good pick, Jason's Lyric. And for my bad pick, the 1996 film Phenomenon.
Yes, and thank you all for listening here. We want to, thank some other people before we announce at the end of this episode. We're going to be revealing what our choices are for next week and everything, so stay tuned for that. But first, we got to thank some people like Chris Oliver for the intro and outro music used for our show. Listen to more of his music at chrisoliver.bandcamp.com. Thanks to Christian Thor Lally for our artwork. Follow him at Night of Water, night with a K, _of_water, for all sorts of stuff that he has, on various socials. And thanks, of course, to our Patreon supporters, patreon.com/DEDBpod, who, ended up voting for this particular episode's topic. So thank you all. We really appreciate that. And also, you'll be getting a bonus podcast here. I think it should be out by the time this episode's been released. Our one for April that would have come out just in time. Our top 10 So Bad They're Good movies. Adam and I recorded that. Had a lot of fun. We really appreciate, patrons for that $1 you've helping to support us for all these years on the show. And of course, we want to thank our guest, Torrey. Thank you so much for coming in a pinch. Always appreciate, love having you on the show.
Hey, I'm completely honored to be part of the show whenever I can. So thank you.
And for more of us, you can find us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook as @DEDBpod. And also you can submit feedback to us, doubleedgedoublebill@gmail.com, all spelled out. Or you can submit on, those various different socials and stuff. And you can find me on Twitter and Letterboxd at NotTheWho'sTommy. I also do some writing at both marianithomas.wordpress.com and film-cred.com. And follow Adam. He's on Instagram at Atom or Adam. That's ATOM_OR_ADAM. And he's Swanson on Letterboxd. It's SCHWANDTSON. And, to follow us and listen to, so much of our, what we've recorded over the last, several years, subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and other podcasting platforms. If you're listening on Talk Film Society, you want to listen to all the other great shows on the network. And you can also dig into our archives and our Podbean main feed for, over 200 episodes, even before we joined Talk Film Society. And nothing else, if you can't, support us on the Patreon, the $1 can be tight. We understand. It really helps out if you just rate, review, or simply share the show around, because it gives us more visibility. And now, usually at the end of episodes, we end up picking randomly a good and a bad pick, and we would usually have Torrey pick a number between 1 and 10 for them. But we're going to do something a bit different here at the end of this episode, because we initially announced we were going to do a special edition sort of topic as our 5th anniversary topic. But things have changed a bit, where we are going to cover at least one movie we've covered before on the show. That was the plan with special edition. We were going to do, a good movie that we would have picked here, and then also Tango and Cash. But some recent events have kind of changed things, where one, Tango and Cash we're still going to cover because the patrons voted for it on our Patreon. We're going to be doing a commentary in May for that, so we'll end up doing that. But we ended up deciding, we're going to forego a topic, even doing a bad pick, because, this interesting, Torrey doesn't even know this. The next episode of Double Edge Double Bill is going to be the last one. I'm not joking here, not doing anything like that. Adam and I kind of came to the mutual decision to have our 5th anniversary big blowout. We're going to end the show there. There'll be more explanation on the particular episode. Stay tuned for next week. But it's going to be our big final blowout, and we decided, let's just do 2 picks we really love. So we're going to end up doing Heat, which we have done before on the show, and that's one of Adam's favorite movies. And then we're going to do probably my favorite movie of all time. I've talked about many times on the show, and, given the last episode, I wanted to finally cover Little Shop of Horrors 1986. So we're going to be covering both those movies, going to be having a lot of fun, and, as I mentioned, ending the show on that particular note.
Well, that took me aback there. Shit.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't tell Torrey about this before. I kind of hinted that something was going to be revealed. I'm sorry I sprung this on you, but you know what? You were a very gracious last guest host, Torrey. I really appreciate it.
I loved every single time I was a guest host on the show the last 5 years. I'm glad to have had the friendship with you the last, like, it's God, man, what, decade and a half of my life at this point. And then meeting Adam. Yeah, I know. I mean, meeting, of course, through you, meeting Adam. And every time I was on the show, I always had the most fun, you know, and it's weird because I always feel like every episode I was on, I always felt like I got more comfortable. I was a lot, you know, more confident, you know, speaking about movies or just having, you know, these chats, if you will. And yeah, I'm honored that I was always a guest on the show, and I'm always going to be thankful for that.
Yeah, I'll say this much. Stay tuned for the next episode. We will at least be talking about, it's not necessarily going to be the end of a podcast on this feed to some degree, but it will be at least the last one of sort of the double-edged double bill duo, as it were, doing the show. We'll explain more next week when we cover, like I said, Heat and the 1986 version of Little Shop of Horrors. We'll be wrapping things up for this particular show, and just stay tuned. We'll be discussing more of our plans next time on that. But until then, everybody, we just recommend you keep all your organs intact for next week.